All right, hi guys. Sorry for the delay. I don't know what I'm not even over it. I mean, you can tell by my voice. I'm gonna have to pause it a few times to blow my nose, but I don't know what I had, but it sucked. So we are a bit behind on lecture. But with being sick, I don't get to travel, which I'm actually kind of glad for. I know it makes me a horrible son and grandson, but I'm sure many of you are not looking forward to having to travel for Thanksgiving. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do this lecture today, which is Wednesday. I'll probably do another one Friday, do one at the weekend, and then that will let us do three during Dead Week, and that should get us caught up. Also, remember I moved the quiz. I sent an email, but just in case you didn't get it, I moved the quiz. It should be due now the Friday of finals week. That'll accommodate for the fact that we are running a little bit behind. I'm hoping we're at least going to get to the Cold War, maybe some civil rights. Hopefully, we'll get a little further, but we're going to see. But right now, today, we need to get through the first half of the Second World War. So, what we're going to do in today's lecture is we're going to talk about Pearl Harbor. We're going to get through the war in the Pacific. And I'm really going to build the case for the use of the atomic bomb. Now, you don't have to agree with me that something about the atomic bomb will probably be one of your essays for your final exam, which the final is not comprehensive. I usually do a multiple choice bonus comprehensive thing. I'm not sure how I'm going to work that. Probably in the form of a multiple choice quiz that has a stupid short time limit. Basically, you already have to know these or you don't get it. I mean, I'll figure something out. But the final itself is just going to cover Unit 3, so World War One to as far as we get. And I'll adjust the potential ID terms and I'll adjust the essays based on how far we get. But if you don't agree with me, the atomic bomb should have been used. That's perfectly fine. I'm not necessarily going to change your mind on that. I will admit they are, horrid weapons. They are cruel weapons. They're barbaric. The fact that one, 18 kiloton fat man could annihilate Hiroshima is, horrific. But I'm going to build it in the context of what if we had invaded Japan, which is what we're planning to do. And you'll see some people. I know if you're a friend, if you follow George Takei on Facebook, he lost family in Hiroshima, so he's very anti-atomic bombs, which it makes sense. But his attitude is, look, the Japanese were willing to surrender; they're ready to surrender. It wasn't necessary, and the fact is that's just not true. Okay, we dropped the bomb on August the 6th, 1945. They keep fighting. We drop a second bomb on August the 9th, 1945. The Soviets invade. Emperor Hirohito, the demigod of Japan, decides to stop the war. And the army, who ran the show, staged a coup because they wanted to keep fighting. Okay, it took the combined power of two atomic bombs, the Soviet Union declaring war, and the Japanese Imperial Guard putting down a military coup to get them to surrender. So I would argue that not only were the atomic bombs necessary, but they saved lives. And hopefully I'll build that case during this lecture. If you disagree with me, again, that's perfectly fine. Hopefully by now you guys have come to learn I'm a big softy. I actually had a former student from one of my upper division classes observe me in my traditional 1103. And he was like, Dr. Prince, you've gotten soft in your old age. I'm like, what are you talking about? I've always been a big softy. If you don't agree with me, that's fine, but this is the argument I want to present. And hang on just a second. I told you I'd have to stop a few times. Okay. Do me a favor. Keep sick at home. And you know what? I'm going to rag on my wife for this because it's not her fault directly. But her boss apparently is one of those old ladies that builds up like 1,000,000,000 hours of sick leave, doesn't know what a vacation is, comes to work sick, and so, yay, that's why I'm sick. So please, please, please bear with me. Well, we left off about to bomb Pearl Harbor. And remember, the United States had enacted that oil embargo. Japan decided that it needed to reach out for raw materials. But now, to invade Malaysia, to invade Indonesia, would have to go through the Philippines. So the Japanese decided their best bet would be to cripple the American Pacific Fleet. And in doing so, that would give them the time they needed to get the resources they needed. And once that was done, they thought they could make the war so costly that the United States would prefer instead to simply sue for peace. So December 7, 1941, and by the way, I hope this is common knowledge. I mean, if you're not an American citizen, okay, I understand. But I had a student in my U.S. since 1865 class that I teach at another college, and she said that, well, in the spring of 1962, what is this, Cuban Missile Crisis? But December 7, 1941, 7:55 a.m. The Japanese launch around 360 aircraft from 6 carriers, and they completely catch the American Navy by surprise. We're not prepared for war. We completely underestimate the ability and the value of aircraft carriers. We just not ready. 4 battleships will be sunk. One more will be critically damaged. One other will be moderately damaged, and 2 are actually going to be pinned because they would have the ships like this. So if here's Ford Island, okay, and here's the ship. So in this case, let's take if this is the Oklahoma, that would make this the Maryland. When the Oklahoma rolls over and sinks, that traps the Maryland between the sunken battleship Oklahoma and Ford Island. So the entire Pacific Fleet is put out of action. 2,400 people are going to be killed. I mean, if we look here, what I was getting at, this is the sunken West Virginia trapping the battleship Tennessee. Up here is the sunken Oklahoma. Of the 2,400 American personnel and civilians that die, half die when the battleship Arizona takes a bomb that detonates in her forward magazine and detonates all the powders for those big 14-inch gun projectiles. I mean, consider this, to random fun fact, to hurl a 1,600-pound 14-inch armor-piercing shell took 600 pounds of explosives. Okay, so if you've got, let's say, on your forward magazine, let's say you have 400 shells. I'm going to do math. It's going to suck. Bear with me. 400 times 600, that's a lot of explosives. And you get one bomb, blows up in that, and the whole thing just explodes. 1,200 people die instantly. Now, hours later, this was part of a combined attack, because hours later, the Japanese, and I've got a map here, are going to raid Midway Island. They're going to hit Wake. They're going to hit Guam. They're going to hit the Philippines. They're going to hit Malaysia. They're going to hit here in the Dutch East Indies. I mean, this is a combined strike. And the sad thing is, we knew it was going to happen, but we didn't know when. And what had happened is the United States government had sent out a flash the week before saying it was going to happen on Sunday, November 30. Well, it didn't happen, so people thought it was just another war scare. So they're completely unprepared. December 8, 1941, we declare war on Japan. And then 3 days later, Germany and Italy, honoring their alliance with Japan, declare war on us. But another fun fact, we are not the first to declare war on Japan. Britain is attacked after Pearl Harbor because, Britain has Borneo, Britain has Malaysia. But when Winston Churchill hears that the United States has been attacked, he supposedly exclaimed, "Thank God we've won the war." Because he knew that now with the United States in, eventually we would be getting the fight with the Nazis, and then we would win the war. I apologize. I love to put humor in these, but World War II, it's one of those, it's hard to find humor, so what I might do is post some cartoons. Because, we're all mature adults. We're not above watching cartoons. I actually posted one, when I gave this lecture. Not this one, but the next one coming up, ending in the Holocaust, because it came up the same day as I had to do my class evaluations, which, by the way, on D2L, you should be see the class evaluations. Remember, if you like me, my name is Dr. Prince. If you don't, my name is Bond, James Bond. But don't just lecture over the Holocaust. We're all depressed. I'm like, crap. I'm not that dumb to make you do evals now. So I showed a cartoon I might post a link on. Private Snafu called Booby Traps. And these are cartoons made for the armed forces, just something that they can watch, something that, poke fun at military humor. But I love it because you always hear your grandparents talk about, the good old days. Well, we're not like, blah, 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 sex like you kids. No, this cartoon, they were not above making boob jokes. Literally, you hear the guy who does the Bugs Bunny voice making a boob joke. It's all sorts of sexist but hilarious. So hopefully that doesn't it's not gotten me fired yet, but hey, there's a first time for everything. So if we look after Pearl Harbor, what is the significance? Well, it brings the United States into war, But now dealing with war, it's like, okay, where do we go from here? What can we do? I'm trying to adjust this. And if we look, this battleship right here, the Pennsylvania, this is the only relatively undamaged battleship at Pearl Harbor. But in front of it, you have the wreckage. Believe it or not, those are 2 American destroyers. Okay, here's the Cassid, but right here is what's left of the destroyer Downs, which also suffered a magazine explosion. So how is the United States ready for war? Well, the fact is we're not. Okay, the Navy is at the bottom. We had not fully grasped the idea of aircraft carriers. I mean, today, if there's problems in the Middle East, we fling a carrier battle group to the Middle East. I mean, that's what we do. But we hadn't grasped, carriers were more for scouting. I mean, that's what you scout for the battle line, then you bring up the battleships, okay? But the Japanese were fully about the aircraft carrier. The battleships were now in supporting roles. We have a huge Navy, bigger than the Japanese, but remember, our Navy is divided in 2 oceans. You've got the Pacific and the Atlantic. And so that means in the Pacific, we now have a smaller Navy than them. Our Army is not that big. The peacetime drafts were not that extensive. Our Air Corps is, still flying some obsolete planes. I mean, we still have old 1930s planes in the Philippines. Our stuff is obsolete. The only thing we really have are submarines, which I've included in your PowerPoints. We won't go over it today, but a lecture or a slide about the submarine warfare, because that's all we have really to combat the Japanese. That's it. And even then, our torpedoes are so bad, the Mark 14 torpedo, that if you fired it, okay, here's what would happen. The idea is it had a little magnetic detonator. So, okay, if here's a ship, it passes under, then it picks up the steel of the hull and detonates, snaps the back of the ship, and the ship breaks in half and sinks. But the fact is, it was so poorly made that sometimes it would just pick up, the magnetism in the water and explode for no reason. Sometimes, if you try to just do contact explosion, okay, ideally you would want a square-on hit. If you did anything other than this, which is how we're not trained to do it, half the time it wouldn't explode. Like, literally, we have the case of, and I want to say it's the USS Tang, but I'm not sure, of a submarine commander who spots an unarmed Japanese merchantman. He fires a spread of 6 torpedoes, 5 hits. He sees the splashes in the water. None of the torpedoes explode. So he reloads his tubes, fires 6 more. All 6 hit. 6 more splashes. No explosion. He spins his submarine around and fires, let's see, I'm trying to remember, it was like 15 torpedoes total. So we're up to 14, no, it was 16 torpedoes. He fires 2 more torpedoes, 2 more splashes, no explosion. What's happening is the torpedo hit, the compressed air tank was rupturing and sending the splash up. I mean, that's, when you see the movies, that's what it is. So he takes his last torpedo back to Pearl Harbor to be examined. We have records that Japanese Maru, that Japanese merchant ship, was taken into dry dock. The captain reports what happened, and literally you could see 16 torpedoes sticking outside of the hull that had not exploded. That's how bad our stuff was early on. So, on the one hand, we begin a naval blockade, but it's ineffective. On the other, FDR wants a Europe first policy. He says that the Nazis are the bigger threat. That's what we're telling our people. But we're doing so because the fact is we are scared to death of a Japanese invasion. Quite literally, the United States Army said that if Japan invaded California before March of 1942, the line could not be held before Chicago. We were literally saying we were going to have to lose the entire west coast of the United States. And so that creates the fear, which is especially important, by the way, in today's times where, I'm not a Trump fan. I think it's been embellished. But people tend to think that he wants, to round up Muslims, to register Muslims, to make them wear special ID badges. Okay? Well, take this at heart. Why, if there's nothing else you take from this class, okay? Now, granted, you better take a hell of a lot more for the exam, but if after the exams, if there's nothing you take from this class, I want you to remember Executive Order 9066. Because we were so afraid of the Japanese invading and taking everything before Chicago. That what we're going to see is with Executive Order 9066 in early 1942, we order the rounding up of all persons of Japanese ancestry, not ethnic Japanese, okay, not Japanese citizens, but American citizens of Japanese ancestry. And we put them in concentration camps. They are not Arbeitslagers, they're not like the Nazi death camps, they're not Auschwitz, but they're, again, that classic, you take a people and you concentrate them for protection of somebody. Now, people fear this. So FDR issues the executive order. 120,000 Japanese Americans are forced into these camps. 2/3 are native born, which means what? Yes, they're American citizens. Not naturalized citizens, but by virtue of birth, American citizens. Now here's the thing. After the war, this is held as constitutional. Now understand, how effective was this versus racism? Excuse me. Well, this is what a camp would look like, by the way. This is the rounding up. And yes, those machine guns are pointed inwards, not outwards. Was this racism? Was this success? I actually got into a Facebook debate, which is something you should never do. Oh, well, we won World War II, and we did it because... No, here's the thing. This only affected people in Washington, in Oregon, or in California. There were far more people of Japanese descent in Hawaii, where we have the fricking naval base of Pearl Harbor, the home port of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. They are not interned. Only the people on the West Coast is interned. Understand this. This was fear, but this wasn't about actual war stuff. This was racism. Japs keep moving. This is a white man's neighborhood. We don't want any Japs back here, ever. And these people are... This guy's happy about it. This woman just looks like she's pissed off at the world. Understand, this is racism. When you were rounded up, you only got what you could carry, okay? The rest was confiscated by the government, and when you were released from the camp after the war, or released if you pledged to either join the army and go fight in Europe, or go move to the East Coast, okay, you didn't get your stuff back. That was property of the United States government. You did not get anything back. So were these people threats? Again, they're Japanese descent, but they are American citizens. We don't see Italians locked up. We don't see Germans locked up. In fact, German prisoners of war, okay, 1943. Here in Oklahoma, there was a prisoner of war camp that had a lot of the Deutsche Afrikakorps. And they were allowed to go to movies on weekends. They were allowed to go get jobs and earn money. They got better treatment than these people. This was purely racist. So when you hear people worry about whether Muslims are going to be rounded up, registered, or ID tagged, there is a precedent. Because here's the thing. What is the significance of 9066? It is still constitutionally valid. If the government deems it as a national security, in the interest of national security, it can round up any one of us and throw us into a political camp. Screw your freedom of speech. Screw your freedom of the press. Never mind habeas corpus. Never mind your Fifth Amendment rights. Never mind your speedy trial. The government has demonstrated it can throw you in a political camp anytime it wants. Now, this is the only time it has done so, unless you want to count the Native American reservations. But the fact is, again, there are still people today, they think this was a valid action. There are people. Mr. Sulu, George Takei, grew up in one of these camps. He was thrown in one at 5 years old. There are still people today that say Mr. Sulu was a threat to the United States in the Second World War. And so, again, this is one I will try to change your mind, in the sense that what we did was wrong, but many people in the United States do not want to come to grips with it. It doesn't fit our narrative of who we are as a people. But we do it because of the fear. We do it because of just how successful the Japanese are being. By the time this is enacted, okay, the Japanese are going to get the majority of New Guinea. They're going to get the Solomons in May. They have the Philippines, Dutch East Indies, French Indochina, all this stuff. The Japanese East Asia co-prosperity sphere is doing fairly well. If we look as far as defeats are concerned, okay, We lose Guam, we lose Guam in December. Wake Island is invaded. They put up a hell of a fight. Their last radio signal, send us more Japs. By the 23rd of December, they capitulate. The Philippines fall on April the 9th, 1942. And we're going to see from there one of the largest war crimes against American soldiers. Because as our guys retreat, they have to retreat to Bataan and the island of Corregidor. And when they surrender, the Japanese then march them. I should have swapped these images. Force march them from Bataan to a prisoner of war camp about 160 miles away. These guys are starving, they're weak, they, malnutrition. But the Japanese, and this is important for the case I'm trying to build, hold to the code of Bushido, the old samurai's code. And what we're going to focus on later is the fact to die for the emperor is glorious. But what we're going to focus on now is to surrender is dishonorable. And that means two things. One, that means for the Japanese that they cannot surrender, that their demigod emperor prohibits it. But the flip side of that is if you surrender to them, you forfeit your rights as a human being. So in this Bataan Death March, they're going to be forced marched. If you stumble and fall, they would bayonet you. If you complained, they would shoot you. If you were too sick to go in, they would bayonet you. If you happen to trip and stumble into a Japanese officer, you're dead. I mean, that's it. I mean, this is very, very brutal. Around 650 Americans are going to die. Between 2,500 and 10,000 Filipino troops are going to die. And it's so bad, it's actually hidden from the Americans until 1944. So a couple of things that East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, remember that racism against the Chinese, well, that's full force against the Filipinos as well. They're also racist against the United States, and one of my grandmother's cousins was actually with one of the two tank battalions, 192nd, I believe, at Bataan, survives the Bataan Death March, dies in a prisoner of war camp in Tokyo in March of 45, which sucks, but it's just, understand this is absolutely brutal. And so it's against this. You can understand the fear. Okay, just like there's the fear of terrorist attacks, just like there's the fear of the Syrian refugees, the fear that at any moment, at any time, any Muslim could become radicalized. There's always that fear. And it's not just, we can see fear like the idea that a law-abiding gun owner is just one day going to snap. Or, if you heard about, well, if you're here in Stillwater, but if you're not, Adacia Chambers, who at the homecoming parade a few weeks ago crashed her car into, the people watching the homecoming parade, killed a bunch of people, wounded a lot of people. There's the fear of people with mental illness. That fear and paranoia, you can understand it. But that doesn't give us any excuse to let go of who we are as a society, who we are as human beings. You can understand the fears of invasion, the fears of Japanese people, but that doesn't excuse the treatment of Japanese American citizens. We can understand the fear of terrorism. That doesn't excuse the treatment of Muslims. We can understand the fear of, psychopaths. That doesn't excuse the treatment of gun owners who are for, sensible gun control and follow the law. But unfortunately, people all too often want to give into fear. And so that's something we all have to be mindful against. The only really victory we have to talk about until June is on April the 18th, 1942. Jimmy Doolittle will put 16 Army B-25 twin-engine bombers on the carrier Hornet. We sail to within 500 miles of Japan, and they take off and go bomb Tokyo. Now, it doesn't do anything of military value, but it's more or less a giant middle finger, because the Japanese had said they were winning the war. The Japanese had said that, there's no way the Americans could ever touch homeland Japan. And then 16 bombers range over dropping a few 500-pound bombs here and there. Now, this actually, it's a morale booster. But, to pull it off, these planes had to be stripped down, extra gas cans added. A lot of their machine guns they had to just throw over the side and get, broomsticks, paint them black. And the crews paid a heavy price. But this was just something we could do to strike back. And so, for many, it shows that we're still trying to be in this fight because the war is just going so horribly. But then that has an unintended consequence. It causes Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had planned Pearl Harbor and who was the commander-in-chief of the Japanese combined fleet, it convinces him that he has to invade Midway Island. Do so he can render Hawaii unusable. If you put heavy bombers in Midway, you can... Again, reverse image. Heavy bombers in Midway, you can then strike Hawaii. You take Hawaii, you can then hit California. But here's the thing. Here's the ace in the hole. This is a technological war. We're not to cover these vast distances. You have to use radio. We can pick this stuff up, so you have to encode it. Well, we had broken the Japanese code, JN25. We knew when they were going to attack, where, with what, how much. And so we scrape up everything we have left. 3 American carriers versus 4 Japanese. And the battle begins on June the 4th, 1942. And here we see the differences in what's going to let the United States win the war. It's a qualitative difference. Not quantity, but quality. In the Japanese system, okay, on ships, you don't train for damage control. Why? Because if you acknowledge your ship's going to be damaged, that is defeatism. You're saying you are entertaining the possibility you're going to lose. Whereas the Americans, we train... We don't care if you have to put baling wire and super glue on it. You keep the damn thing afloat. So we're going to see, just it's a very desperate battle. I mean, I've got some stuff here. We're going to see also that the Americans have a training disparity. The Japanese were literally trained. You could have 4 carriers in a task force, and the 4 carriers could launch all of their squadrons. Each Japanese carrier would carry 3 squadrons, an American 4. They could all form up for one massive attack. The Americans, you would have 4 squadrons on your carrier, and half the time they couldn't even operate together, let alone from multiple carriers. So you're going to get a case of what will happen with the Japanese is planes would come in, and they would pull down the combat air patrol, the planes that would be flying over the carriers protected. Then another group come in, it brings them down to attack. Then another group. And then finally you get the dive bombers that come in overhead, and there's nothing they can do. And we see that, and I might put the film up, but we see that with the death of Torpedo Squadron 8. And this is really creepy. If you're a John Wayne fan, you probably know who John Ford is. John Ford directed a lot of the old John Wayne movies. The biggest one that comes to my mind, Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which, watch that movie and tell me that it doesn't make you want to eat a big-ass steak. I'm just saying. But he had 2 camera crews active during the Battle of Midway. He had one on Midway Island. I'll post that film, where you could literally watch firsthand the Battle of Midway. It's a short 15-minute film, but it's very inspiring. It's great propaganda. He also had a camera crew on the carrier Hornet, and so what they did, just to talk about, John Q. Public, Joe Everyday, whatever, fighting the war, they interviewed all the guys of Torpedo Squadron 8 on film. The next day, they launch against the Japanese carriers. All 15 planes are shot down. There is only one survivor, Ensign George Gay. He's the only guy that survives. Because what happens is the carriers launch. Some of the planes don't find their targets. Some of the dive bombers have new automatic bomb arming things that when you arm it, it would just drop the bomb in the ocean. Literally everything that could go wrong did. And so what we see is, Torpedo Squadron 8 comes in without fighter patrol. They lost their fighter escorts from their own carrier. The Japanese just massacre them. But it means the combat air patrol has to come down. Then another group of torpedo planes from the Enterprise, VT-6, comes in. That brings them down. Then dive bombers come in. That brings them down. Then more dive bombers come in, but now they're above the combat air patrol. Dive in. The Japanese can't do anything. And on 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, they score between literally 2 and 3 bomb hits, and that's enough. That's enough because the Japanese got sloppy. They go bomb Midway Island, but they don't put it out of action. Well, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the commander of the Japanese fleet, had wanted half of his planes armed with torpedoes in case he spotted American ships. Well, he did, so he arms those. Well, then they need a strike about from Midway. So what they do is they just they take the armament off the planes, and rather than putting them back in the hangars, back in the storage, they just leave them on the deck. Then bring out new ordnance. You get a 1,000-pound general purpose bomb in the middle of just a ton of ordnance, and 2 or 3 bombs, all it takes to turn a Japanese carrier into a funeral pyre. 3 Japanese carriers are set ablaze and sunk. The Japanese respond and they attack the carrier Yorktown, where they score 2 bomb hits. Okay. Then another battle, the 4th Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, is sunk, but not before it gets off another strike, which hits the Yorktown again, and this time puts 2 torpedoes into it. So now this carrier's got 2 bombs, 2 torpedoes. 2 to 3 bombs sinks a Japanese carrier. This thing has 2 torpedoes and 2 bombs and is still afloat. It takes a Japanese submarine firing 2 more torpedoes into it before the carrier Yorktown sinks. This is a decisive win. This is the turning point of the war in the Pacific. This is a watershed. Because the Japanese, were suffering what they called victory disease. The idea they believed that they were absolutely invincible. And so they're just mounting assault after assault after assault after assault. But this just completely changes the balance of power. And so the Japanese can never again mount offensive operations. And now the U.S. has the chance to go on the offensive. This is so bad, the Japanese outright lie to their people. They say, well, we lost 1 carrier, but we sank all 3 and took Midway Island. All the survivors from the ships that were sunk were quickly spirited away to like New Guinea or the Solomons or the Dutch East Indies, anywhere but Japan, so they couldn't tell people. Unfortunately, there was an American aviator that was shot down during one of the attacks. Not George Gay. He lived, but there was another guy. It was picked up by a Japanese destroyer who, his punishment for his side winning the battle, they tied scrap iron to his feet and then pushed him over the side of their ship, drowning him, because that was his punishment for the United States winning the battle. Quite literally, this is a major, major blow to the Japanese. And so it lets us go on the offensive in Guadalcanal. And I don't want to spend too much time on Guadalcanal. But to see where Guadalcanal is, that's going to be here. Where's my mouse pointer? Here in the Solomons. And the idea, what we want to do, and this is going to get into the larger island hopping campaign, is we're going to have what's the Northern Pacific up here, which is protecting Alaska, because, hey, look, we actually can see Russia from her house. Which, again, remember, it's Tina Fey, not Sarah Palin, that said that. But the idea is have a Central Pacific strategy, invade up to Okinawa to prepare to invade Japan. And have a South and Southwest Pacific strategy, go through New Guinea, go to the Philippines, and then that way you can, deprive Japan of her raw materials. Now, what I want you to take from Guadalcanal, we are a bit behind, so don't worry too much about it, it is successful. Now we start to see a qualitative effect, but we see a schism, if you will. On land, the Japanese are inefficient. Okay, again, that code of Bushido, that if you die, you go, there's the shrine they believe that all military people go, and I can't, Yasukuni Shrine, I believe. To die in the service of the Emperor is glorious. So what we're going to see is the Japanese had put too much emphasis on the individual combat soldier. Their artillery dates from the First World War. Their tanks, okay, to put it in perspective, an American tank rendered obsolete in the European theater. Okay, again, hopefully you've see the movie Fury to know how bad American tanks were, okay? An American tank obsolete in Europe could kill any Japanese tank at any stage of the war. Japanese tanks are horrendous. Their machine guns are horrible. They had the bright idea, because they made them so complex, that what we're going to do is the factory would put oil on the gun cartridges. Never mind that's going to pick up dirt and grit and just jam stuff up. They're also going to have kooky stuff like they believed in bayonet charges. A rifle with bayonet, it's pretty common. They put bayonets on their machine guns. Quite literally, the Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns had bayonet mounts. I'm just wondering, what do? Take this huge thing and just try to stab somebody with this 20-pound hunk of steel? I mean, seriously. So what they would have to do is resort to what they would call banzai charges. They're bayonet charges. I've got a picture here in a bit. And the idea is they believe that morale and spirit would help overcome a position. But morale and spirit are nothing against accurate rifle fire and water-cooled Browning machine guns. And so these guys get slaughtered. And what we notice is they're great fighters. Okay, they exact a high price, but we're going to see that the Japanese would often prefer to die to a man rather than surrender. We're also going to see in naval battles, the Japanese are expertly trained in night fighting. They are damn good, and so the war is going to be long and costly. So we come up with the idea of island hopping. And hang on just a second, I need to take a brief break. Alright. Had to blow my nose, and I'm always worried because I'm hitting the pause button. I'm just waiting for me to blow my nose on screen and, it not get edited out and you guys be like, what the hell? But we decide island hopping because we say, if we go back to, hang on, go back to this map, okay? That's a lot of red we've got to take. So if we can bypass it, so okay, we've got Guadalcanal. Well, what if we take this part of New Guinea, this part of New Britain, bypass it and hit the Marianas? Then bypass all this stuff and hit the Philippines, bypass this and hit Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and then take Japan. The strongest garrisons we can just starve out. And we have to do that because the resistance is, again, a lot of casualties. Guadalcanal is fairly bloody. The Japanese, again, want to die to a man. If we look at the island of Tarawa in the Gilberts, out of 35,000 Marines engaged, 1,000 will be killed in action. Whereas the Japanese, out of 4,800 troops, only 146 will surrender. Because, again, and in many cases, this wasn't a case of they would go out fighting, but they were just simply told, don't surrender. So what they would do is they would take hand grenades. If you've ever seen Letters from Iwo Jima, this is a good representative of it. They take the grenade, pull the pin, Tendohe Banzai, long life to the emperor, hold it, and just blow themselves up. Because killing yourself in the service of the emperor was seen as way preferable to surrender. I finally have a joke, though. And it's actually not a joke, but it's actually true. At Tarawa, they didn't want the United States to know how many troops they had. So they brilliantly camouflaged everything. It was hard to see. I mean, you look from the air, you couldn't tell. Except for one thing. They looked and they found all the latrines, all the toilets, right? From these aerial photographs. And so they assigned a guy and figured out, okay, how many dudes do you think can, use the same toilet? And worked out the number. And literally, he was off by 50 guys. We knew within 50 guys how many people they had on Tarawa based on their poopers. Which makes me think that's just a really shitty job if your job is to figure out how many guys... How do you test how many people can use a toilet? Again, just random history question. I mean, how do you put that into practice? What is your frame of reference? I mean, that's just creepy. But island hopping, we also choose it because the resistance becomes even stiffer. And here's where we're going to take a really, really, really dark turn. The Japanese, the closer you get to Japanese soil, become increasingly more fanatic. Okay, we're going to see at Saipan, which would be right around here. This is the first place we have where there are civilians. We'll come back to this slide. And so what we're going to see is civilians. We've got lots of combat footage of American troops. Don't do it. But Japanese civilians, oftentimes women with their babies, flinging themselves off cliffs rather than surrender. And the thing is, they do this because they've been told that if they surrender, they will have, poor treatment from the Allies. They've been told, one of the popular rumors was that to be an American Marine, you had to present proof that you killed your grandmother to the recruiter, and only then could you be eligible to be a Marine. Which makes me question, what do you do if, you're a grandmother and you have like 5 grandkids that want to be Marines? I mean, do they just take a piece of you in? I mean, how does that work? But they actually believe this stuff. So tens of thousands at Saipan, 150,000 at Okinawa. And so again, we see if civilians will commit suicide in the islands, what happens when we invade Japan? And that's the question I want you to start asking. What happens when we invade Japan? We're also going to get various permutations of the kamikaze. This is a banzai charge. Or with the kamikaze, you take a plane, you strip it down, you have, you literally take a newbie pilot who doesn't know how to land, because that's not important, And the idea is you just crash headlong into an American ship. Because that's going to cause a lot of damage. It's psychological, and it's twofold. One, you want to cause damage. Here's one about to smash into the battleship Missouri. Here's the carrier Franklin having received the kamikaze. And it's twofold. It causes a hell of a lot of damage. Okay, the bomb you might be carrying, the explosive from something coming in at 300 miles an hour, plus aviation gasoline, that's a hell of a fireball. It's designed to inflict maximum damage, but also to the stinging point. Invading Japan will be too costly. The Japanese, that was the message they wanted to send. Now, they don't realize we have the atomic bomb, so their thought is, if we don't invade Japan, we seek a negotiated peace. What they don't realize is we're going to develop alternative means. Or you'll get things like this. The Kaiten human torpedo. Where what you do, it's literally a longer torpedo that has a compartment that you would sit in, and, you drive it into the target. You make sure that torpedo is going to hit the target. Now, these cause a ton of damage. Not that many ships are going to be sunk, but, several hundred ships will be damaged. In the Battle of Okinawa alone, 5,000 American sailors are going to die. And I'm not going to lie, 1945. This is kamikaze damage from one fighter plane smashing into the battleship Mississippi. Why I bring that up is one of these guys in this 20mm anti-aircraft battery is my grandfather. He pulled me aside once, and he had two battle stations. If they were bombarding stuff, he manned a 14-inch naval gun. But during air attacks, he commanded a 20mm gun, and he told me how once a Japanese kamikaze smashed in only about 15, 20 feet away from him. This was the only one that hit the battleship Mississippi. So if some Japanese kamikaze pilot 70 years ago had been, you can't see hands, but about 10 feet better with his aim, somebody else would be boring you to death right now. I wouldn't be here. And the whole idea is this causes psychological... I mean, I remember the man telling me this, and it's actually him in part why I wanted to do history, because the innocence of youth. He couldn't tell his family, his wife, his stepwife, my mother, but I remember him pulling me aside as like a 7-year-old child and telling me these stories. But it's psychological. I mean, if you listen to any interviews of people that ever went through kamikazes, there was actually a really great one I watched last night. It was an old series, Gladiators of World War II, the Kamikaze. It was this guy, and the first kamikaze he ever saw, he sees the guy, he's coming in, he thinks he's going to drop a bomb. And he doesn't. He just keeps coming in. And the guy starts screaming, "Pull out, you bastard. Pull out." But they would literally get like 20 and 22-year-old kids, tell them it's a glory to die for the emperor. You strap yourself in combat and you crash your plane into this ship. I think all told, something like 3,000 or 4,000 kamikaze pilots. And so it's just that idea. All of this resistance, people willingly giving themselves, committing suicide, people flinging themselves off, cliffs. How bad will it be when we invade Japan? And by now, the U.S. has total superiority. We're going to get what's called, when we invade the Marianas, this is when we get Saipan, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, because the Japanese pilots have no experience. We literally destroy the Japanese Air Force. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, we destroy what's left of the Japanese Navy. By October, we invade the Philippines, and MacArthur gets to say I came through, and I have returned. We have avenged the loss of the Philippines in 1942. I even throw a little note here, Surigao Strait, the last battleship v. battleship gunfight. My grandfather, the same one that survived that kamikaze strike, was there. And it's just this idea, by 1944, it is clear we are going to win the war. The Japanese have nothing left. But so now we have to gear up for the invasion of Japan. And so to do that, we're going to fight 2 more battles. And the first one is at Iwo Jima. And I'm sorry to say, for fans of the Marine Corps, this one was not necessary. With the capture of Saipan and Tinian, we now have B-25 bombers, and these are huge aircraft that can make it from, we can literally fly from Tinian to Tokyo and back again. But the thought is, and so as we start bombing Japan, the thought is, what happens if a plane is damaged over Japan? I don't know, there we go. That's a long stretch of ocean. So if we take Iwo Jima, it's an alternate landing field. So that's why we take it. And we're going to see it's a 5-week battle, February to March 1945. This is also the first time, this is the first true home Japanese territory that's invaded. Everything else was stuff they had gotten either in World War II or after World War I from the Germans. And the Japanese put up a stiff resistance. 6,800 Americans dead in 5 weeks. 19,000 wounded. 19,000 Japanese killed. Many of them fighting and dying to the last man or blowing themselves up or committing seppuku because that was seen as preferable to surrender. And this is just absolutely horrific. And people start to say, again, the war in the Pacific is going to be too costly. Last time we're in the middle of Germany. The Germans aren't putting up this stiffer resistance. That's also, we know Germany has no problem losing a war. Japan doesn't want to lose a war. We're going to have to invade Japan. How bad will it be? And so that's why the propaganda for this photograph, to get people to, again, keep buying war bonds and stuff like that if you've seen Flags of Our Fathers, because we have to make sure the effort is there. Quite literally, the target date for the invasion of Japan, the first invasion, 1 November 1945. The second, March 1946. By 1948, we hope resistance would cease. We've got to build up another 3 years' worth of cash and bullets and stuff. Also, another thing, this photo's I won't say a reenactment, but this is the second flag on Mount Suribachi. The first one, it was small, but it was all they had, and somebody said, no, we need a bigger one. So that's why they get everybody around to be able to do this huge, big flag. But, I mean, this is enough to try to get more people on board with the war. But the hits keep coming. We've taken Iwo Jima. Now we've got our landing base. Now we need to take Okinawa. Okay, I'm going to click back. Because with Okinawa, our first invasion is going to be here at Kyushu. And then we'll invade Hokkaido. So with Okinawa, I mean, this is sovereign Japanese territory. A lot of civilians live here. And this one's an army ship, with the Philippines mostly in American army hands, whereas the Iwo Jima was Marines, because you've got, it was Vandegrift or Nimitz who said, the flag raising in Iwo Jima means a Marine Corps for the next 200 years. Okinawa was an army show. Okinawa is 340 miles away from Japan. It's an 82-day long thing between April and June. The kamikaze strikes will be the worst of the war here. They're going to take the giant battleship Yamato, okay, the biggest battleship ever built, 80,000 tons, 9 18.1-inch guns. They're going to try to drive her ashore to use as a gun battery, the ultimate kamikaze. She sunk en route, but that's how desperate the Japanese get. 14,000 Americans dead, 70,000 wounded, 77,000 Japanese troops killed, 150,000 Japanese civilians. And the civilians aren't killed, most of them aren't killed by American troops. They commit suicide. And so what we see is the Japanese sends everything they have. Naval-wise, plane-wise, everything they've got. The Japanese have nothing left offensively, but they're going to be even more desperate, okay? Even more desperate at home. And so this convinces war planners that the invasion of Japan would be too costly. And it convinces Truman, who by June 1945, as this wraps up, the Gadget, the first atomic bomb in history, is ready for testing. It convinces him that that's what we have to do. Now, if we want to talk about the invasion of Japan, why they decide against it, again, here's just a map talking about Operation Downfall, the various invasions. Sorry, not Hokkaido, Honshu, my bad. Hokkaido's up here, we would invade Kyushu, and then we would invade Honshu, and a little diversionary here at Shikoku. But a lot of troops, but we knew the Japanese would be desperate. They don't, their best tanks have been held in reserve. Their best planes have been held in reserve. Everything that, could not be spared was held in reserve. But qualitatively, the Japanese are inefficient. I mean, this is what passes for a first-rate anti-tank weapon. What do? You take a bamboo stick, basically. You put a shaped charge on it, and they're using these in the Philippines. And this is what they would use in Japan. What you do, you run up to an American tank, and you jam it into the side. And if you see these little sticky out things, because that's a technical term, it pushes them in, detonates the warhead, and just blows up. You go with it. If you were assigned as an anti-tank guy, you're dead. This is top shelf. The other, you would literally take an anti-tank mine or grenade, dive under a tank, pull the fuse yourself. In the Philippines and in Okinawa, one of the things we're doing for an anti-tank mine, they don't have mines, take a bomb, dig a pit, put the bomb in the pit, you sit in with the pit, you wait till the American tank comes over, you pull out a hammer, and you bash the bomb and you set it off. That's how desperate they're getting. Ladies, the Japanese are equal opportunity employers. Operation Ketsu Go. Japan decides to commit suicide as a nation. So ladies, you are being trained to use bamboo spears under the aegis of the army. You would form militia units. And the idea is when the Americans invade, men and women together would just mass bonsai charge into the invasion beach. So, again, do we need the atomic bomb? Well, consider this. Let's not look at how many Americans will die. We'll in a second. How many Japanese do you think are going to die if you have 100,000 women with bamboo spears rushing at American tanks? Okay, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath. The Japanese were literally planning to commit seppuku or ritual suicide as a nation. So when you say the atomic bomb's not necessary, let's look at the harsh realities. We have an invasion plan good to go. If the bombs don't work, we're going to do it. We know 1 for 45, 1 for 46. We're done by 50 if we're lucky. It's called Operation Downfall, and the casualties. Projected losses, 1.2 million Americans, 267,000 dead, 5 to 10 million Japanese dead and wounded. Now consider this, 1.2 million wounded. 1 million wounded, okay? 267,000 dead. To put that in perspective, 267,000 dead is double the amount of American dead in World War I and is 67,000 more than half all American dead in the Second World War. 5 to 10 million Japanese dead. This would have been the eradication of Japanese culture. The atomic bombs are horrific, I will grant you, okay? But let's look at this. Hiroshima, 69,000, plus the 40,000 from Nagasaki. So that's, 109,000. And let's figure 200,000 radiation. So let's just say 300,000 dead Japanese and no dead Americans versus 5 to 10 million Japanese and 267,000 Americans. It sucks. But a couple of things. One, it saves lives because it forces them to... Two, understand this. The atomic bombs are not that revolutionary. More people die in Operation Meeting House. We'll talk about this the next lecture when we end up World War II. Operation Meeting House, March 1945, 330 B-29s drop incendiary bombs. Remember, Japanese cities are largely made of wood. Wood burns. We burn down most of Tokyo. We kill 100,000 civilians. We kill more in Tokyo in one raid than... We kill almost as much in Tokyo in one raid than with 2 atomic bombs combined. Here's the thing. The only difference with the atomic bomb, it's 1 aircraft, 1 plane. They don't kill millions. These aren't megaton weapons. These are an 18 and a 21 kiloton device. But it's the fact that, 1 plane can do it. That is the sharp stinger. The taste of what's to come. That's what drives Japan to quit. The casualties, they've been suffering those casualties since March at least of 1945, and it's not made them stop. So I hate to end on a bit of a sad note, but I think we'll call it good there. I'll post this as soon as I can. I will post what I'll post. You don't need to watch it, but if you want to, please feel free. I'll post John Ford's Battle of Midway. That's up on YouTube, as well as Torpedo Squadron 8. 8's pretty sad, I'm not going to lie, because it's the realization that everybody you see, save one guy, dies within 24 hours of when that film was made. But, you know, unfortunately, that is the harsh realities of war. So, take it easy. Have a good one. I will try to get up the next lecture as soon as possible and see if we can't get us back on track. As always, if you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.